Today's talk is titled The Paradoxes of Climate Change Hysteria. This is my email address. Feel free to write to me if you have any question. In the introduction, I'll talk briefly about what is a paradox, when it is created, a word or two about sustainable, and then I'll introduce you the climate change history itself. The biggest trait of paradox, it changes from real to artificial. I give you an example because then you will understand that today's culture is all paradoxical. In 17th century, Harvard College research question was, how many angels can dance on the head of a pin? Today, a prominent research question is, what is a woman? In essence, we have not evolved over centuries. At the end of this talk, you appreciate that we have indeed regressed and we have added more confidence in our ignorance. Today, science itself is guided by leaders who started off with false premise. Any paradox, the most important part of a paradox is it starts off with false premise. And that is being touted as science. Today, if you look at the most used word in science these days is sustainable development. This is on UN. And what is the most difficult task they want to undertake? Tackling climate change. So somehow sustainability is embedded with climate change. Then more sign of paradoxical thinking. This is from UN. They are very concerned about the welfare of the children, particularly non-white people. Yet, everybody knows new science has the premise that humans are liabilities. In a recent tweet, this paradox was pointed out, where we had last week protest why right to abort children. Today we have protest why to protect the children from the guns. There's nothing logical about the way we're indoctrinated to think. When it comes to climate change, this is what has happened. In the 70s, there was second coming of ice age. 80s, acid rain became the villain. 90s, first time, they started to talk about global warming. In 2000, the word global warming became climate change. After that, Nobody investigated. What is the science? Why are you saying all these things? They automatically designated carbon, water, sunlight as the enemy. In 2019, they decided to dim the sun. Sunlight is the enemy, remember, with acid. We came from acid was the enemy in 80s. Now we have to spray acid to save from another enemy, which is the sunlight. This whole paradoxical thinking was encapsulated during the COVID-19 pandemic era. The corporations made record profit. Economic status of the world dipped lowest possible. Now that the profiteering has subsided, it started another climate change hysteria. You can see that in their summits. All of these, each of them is based on demonstrably false premise. Nobody looked into that. And if they did look into that, they could not dare question it because there would be no money. As a matter of fact, your ability to make a living would be stopped. So these paradoxes are ubiquitous, they're everywhere, and rooted in original sin, manifested in original sin. So we know that when they talked about original sin, that was dogmatic. It was paradoxical thinking. But we do not understand, at least not outside, that we have not moved forward when you replace original sin with original gene. They both are rooted in false premises. If you start off with the false premise, all you see is contradiction. So I'll point out some of these contradictions. Al Gore, he is a lawyer, he was a lawyer, has nothing to do with science. And where does it come from? He was a senator from Tennessee. Tennessee is a nuclear state. They make profit, they make money out of sending nuclear everything. He declares that he knows more than anybody else when he started the global warming hysteria. And he ends up getting Nobel Prize. From lawyer in nuclear state to the Nobel Prize winning scientist who taught the whole world carbon is the enemy. Nuclear is fine. And who is their spokesperson? Who is their representative? You have heard about Greta Thunberg, her so-called famous speech, "You have stolen my dreams and my childhood" with empty words. She's very angry. At the end, she said, "How dare you?" She's no scientist. As a matter of fact, she was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome, obsessive compulsive disorder, and selective autism. She herself says she only speaks when necessary. So science has dipped so low that they have to bring up a mentally ill child to promote their agenda. And it's nothing new. As a matter of fact, way back in 1992, that's the time Algorian philosophy was just cropping up. Severin Suzuki from Canada, at age 12, she was lecturing. "I'm afraid to go out in the sun now because of the hole in our ozone layer." I'm afraid to breathe the air because I don't know what chemicals are in. If a 12-year-old child is afraid to even breathe, as a parent, you are the child abuser. This fear has no basis, but we let that happen. Why? Because we make money. We have to promote an agenda. This is not a science. This is the worst form of profiteering. Every statement has a premise. They might be hidden, but if those premises are illogical, the whole train of thought would crumble. You would see paradoxical. A paradoxical thought cannot explain a single event, natural event. You can say anything, and I can point out it has at least one major and one minor premise attached to it. And if they're false, you have invoked a paradox. Being aware of your underlying premises makes it conscious thinking. And that is really is the essence of humanity. In other words, by making people not be aware of the underlying premises, we have taken away their humanity. And that's why you can tolerate this kind of paradoxical thinking. Both deductive logic and inductive logic, there is no other logic. They both have premises, underlying assumptions. If they're false, there's no point continuing. For deductive logic, it is quite well known, except that we do not talk about it. We talk about the results. If you like the results, if the results are going to make me money, we do not talk how it was derived. We take it as fact. Inductive logic is less known because quite often we say, well, we just observe, but we forget any control experiment will have assumptions first. For engineers, you would know no flow boundary, uniform flow boundary, rectilinear linear flow, maximum 3D flow. These are all premised on something that does not exist in nature. Sure enough, people are doing control experiments, producing results that support their false premises, and they say, wow, we have proven something. Take every experiment that are conducted today with billions of dollars funding, including the super collider in France. They are doing exactly that. Completely meaningless exercise. So literally, only way we're allowed to think is with circular reasoning. On the atheist, atheist and religious argument, it is quite well known, but I would spare you of that. So what you have in science, in the global warming or climate change, we have 97% promoting one ideal, and that's being called settled science, 3% doing the other way. And they are called climate deniers. You know who I'm talking about. This 97%, that by the way evolved. It was 100%, then it went down to 91%, 93%. They're always changing to give an aura that there is some science involved in this percentage, as if having 100% people approving a nonsense becomes science. They all say carbon is the enemy. So this is a brief summary of what happened. We started off with global warming. Then at that time, right at the time, we were talking about carbon tax. We were talking about 90s. Now carbon tax is reality. Canadian people are dying, starving because they cannot pay the bills. All based on false premise that was attached decades ago. It's continued. It has nothing to do with science. It has everything to do with politics. And now all the money is being collected to promote what? There's a picture. They want to subsidize renewable, so-called renewable, which is, by the way, we have done volumes of work, is anything but renewable. So they want to channel money from all other sector to pay for so-called renewable. Why? Because they want to reduce carbon. And carbon yet is the backbone of life. There is no life without carbon. The other part, the 3%, they said, well, geological cycle always went up and down. So there is no global warming. Climate change is natural. Even those 3% are wrong. If you see that throughout history, there's something very unusual with the modern era, the plastic era. One mistake we make is to think that more people support something, it becomes true. That never is the case. The correct promise would be naturally sustainable, unnatural is implosive. This is the graph nobody talks about. There's 97% or 3%, none of them. If it is organic, if it is natural, it will be always good for you. If it is artificial, it will always be bad for you. Don't know, there is no escape. If you do that, you can see with that correct promise, all the activities that we have introduced in the last 100 some years, the plastic era, they are all implosive. They are the one creating unsustainable carbon dioxide. The carbon dioxide that comes out of that process is contaminated. That cannot be recycled. Then you look at the data and you can see all the data, same data, by the way, can be explained with two types of CO2. The CO2 that has been polluted by this artificial and the other one that is natural. There's nothing wrong with natural and there's nothing right about artificial. If you do that distinction and put all the artificials into one package, you can see that we have a recipe for disaster. And by the way, when you talk about electric vehicle and all the so-called renewable energy, you can look that up. They produce more artificial. They produce more pollutant for carbon dioxide. So they will all fall under the downside. Of course, refining is the one that we have introduced artificial. That way, even fossil fuel becomes unsustainable. At the end, this is what you are talking about. The first synthetic element, if you have artificial element in the beginning, it turns downward. It's not good for the environment. all the CO2 involved in coming in touch with those would be harmful. And they will not go back to the atmosphere, to the ecosystem. So we have literally characterized carbon dioxide into convertible CO2 and non-convertible CO2. And this is unique. This is what explains that both 97% and 3%, they're both wrong. With that, you can see that 97% settled science as well as 3% climate deniers are both wrong. They both employ false premises. None of the two can rationally explain natural phenomena. By focusing on carbon, real sustainability is being shunned. The premise, nature is perfect and natural is sustainable, removes all contradictions and can explain all natural phenomena. I have published, and we're supposed to give some reference. I have given some references in the paper, but literally with that premise that nature is perfect, I have produced volumes of work and none of them introduces paradoxical thinking, and they can all explain every phenomenon you can come up with. Thank you very much.